maternal indignation echoed throughout the house like a hurricane, leaving traces of disarray in its wake. Liam, tired from his unsuccessful attempt to find something edible in the refrigerator, fixed his gaze on Layla as if everything that could calm his empty feeling of hunger depended on her. The oppressive silence hung in the air, as if waiting for a push to transform into a storm of words and emotions. "Darling, you know it was dinner. I tried to prepare something filling for everyone." Layla helplessly tried to diffuse the conflict. She looked at him hopefully, wishing that at least one of her arguments would break through the wall of his dissatisfaction. "And what kind of dinner is it without a proper piece of meat?" Liam insisted, his voice tinged with discontent and disappointment. "I work too. I also contribute to the family's finances, and this is what I get in return." Layla felt her heart beating faster. She mentally prepared herself for the battle that ensued every time the month ended. Her tired eyes scanned the room, sensing the heaviness in every corner, every object, as if they were witnesses to their marital discord. "Liam, we always find a way out of this situation," she whispered softly, trying not to succumb to panic. She knew that time and time again, this was a challenging test for their family. There was a moment of tense silence, as if time had frozen, anticipating how this argument would escalate. Layla's eyes roamed the walls of the room, as if seeking support, but inside, her eyes dampened with tears, preparing for a new wave of disagreements. "Liam, please, don't start," she began, but was ruthlessly interrupted by her husband. "Are you really going to repeat the same thing again? When will you finally understand what needs to be done?" he yelled, desperation and disappointment evident in his voice. Layla felt her knees weaken, pressing herself against the wall as if seeking support. It was the cursed dilemma in which they were stuck. She wanted to block her ears, to escape, but she was chained to this place, to this conversation that always ended with the same accusation. "We've discussed this so many times," she helplessly uttered, but her words drowned in the depths of his irritation. "The same old story all the time. I'm tired. I need support, not constant words," Liam sharply retorted. Layla flinched in surprise. Her heart pounded even harder, as if she was trying to break free from this situation. She stared into his eyes, their sincerity clouded by misunderstanding and hurt. Layla was taken aback, gesturing as if trying to shield herself from the heated words that struck her to the core. "Please, just think, how is it even possible? I want to work, but the situation with the kids. I can't leave them alone, especially the younger ones. Dealing with the older ones isn't easy either." Bitterness pierced every word. She was dismayed and hurt by his lack of understanding. "Yes, others manage without nannies or help from relatives. But we don't have that option. We're on our own." Her voice sounded mixed, genuinely bewildered and slightly accusatory. She felt tears welling up, but she clenched her teeth, refusing to show weakness. "You know that my parents are elderly and in poor health. They can't handle the kids, and your parents have their own affairs. Don't put everything on someone else's shoulders," she continued quietly and stubbornly, feeling each word intensify her inner struggle. Her husband's words about the fear of being indebted to someone else hit her as if an invisible hand had struck her heart hard. She froze in place, her hands, damp from water, unexpectedly stilled. Layla felt as though instead of tears on her cheeks, there were only searing traces of words. Our children," she whispered, barely containing a wave of emotions. "You wanted them too. You did." The bitterness in her voice carried mixed feelings of love, hurt, and helplessness. Layla stood frozen, as if a sudden blow had left her breathless. Her husband's words struck the deepest corner of her soul, making her heart quiver with hurt and disappointment. These words were new, threatening, like a powerful strike at the very foundation of their family union. He had never risen to such heights of insult and accusation before. "What are you saying, Liam?" she whispered, her voice sounding feeble, as if it trembled within her soul. This was an unprecedented turn. Liam had never been so harsh in his words before. He knew how she cared for the children, how meticulously and devotedly she embraced her role as a mother. "You have nothing to do with our children," she repeated in a whisper, feeling something inside her break. It was a blow to her self-worth, a hit to their family values. It seemed like Liam could read her thoughts, understanding how his words wounded her. He was resolute, as if ready to resolve this issue here and now. "You use the children too much to cover up your shortcomings," he said with cold certainty. "I've worked all day, and what about you? Hasn't anyone stopped by? These words, like invisible wedges, pierced Layla's heart, leaving behind blinding pain and disappointment. She met his gaze in silence, experiencing weakness in her knees and indescribable pain within. Layla felt reality shattering under the weight of accusations. Despite the tears, she staggered, paying little attention to her surroundings, and rushed out of the kitchen, barely noticing the way to reach the children's room. Mateo, usually watchful over the younger ones, stared at his mother, his usually cheerful face expressing deep seriousness. "Mom, what happened?" he asked, causing genuine concern with his unusually mature tone. "Everything's fine, sweetie," Layla hurried to reassure him, aware of her confusion. She tried to conceal her tears, timidly wiping them away. The boy looked intently into his mother's eyes, then glanced at the younger ones. He nodded slowly, as if deciding that his mom didn't want to worry the children. Layla didn't try to persuade him otherwise. She quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day, Mateo would have plenty to do, and he wouldn't revisit this unfortunate moment. Engulfed in a storm of emotions, Layla felt her pain becoming overwhelming and unbearable. Their apartment felt cramped. Every corner reminded her of the troubled state of their family relationships. Right now, she didn't want to see her husband, especially because she sensed that he wasn't going to easily back down from his accusations and dialogue. Despite the late hour, she had no choice but to leave the apartment. She understood that leaving the children practically alone wasn't the best decision, but in her current state, she couldn't interact adequately with them. It seemed to her that her presence or absence didn't matter. Mateo would still take care of the younger ones. The certainty of her son's responsibility and care brought her some relief, however small. Layla wandered the streets, almost oblivious to her surroundings, as if lost in the realm of her thoughts. The downpour had begun, but she paid no attention to it. Questions swirled in her mind, ones she couldn't find answers to. How had her youthful love turned into what was happening now? How could her husband openly accuse her of infidelity without any evidence? These questions haunted her mind like restless demons, denying her any peace. Recalling her past, Layla revisited the pages of her university years at the prestigious economics faculty of the country's top university. In her memories, Liam appeared as a young, ambitious entrepreneur with grand plans. Their relationship seemed like a true romantic idyll, filled with attention, lavish dinners, countless gifts, and enormous bouquets of flowers. But somewhere along the way, they found themselves in a situation neither of them could foresee. It all started when Liam persistently urged his future wife to leave her studies at the institute. "What do you need it for? My income will be enough for both of us. You just need to stay home and take care of household chores," he insisted. At first, Layla dismissed the idea entirely. She had grown up in an orphanage and had every chance to fall into the deepest abyss, but persistence and luck helped her escape from that difficult situation. She made enormous efforts to establish herself in the new world she found herself in. But ultimately, Liam managed to convince her that this new world wasn't going anywhere. Initially, when Layla and Liam were together, they enjoyed tranquility. According to Liam's plan, she took care of the daily chores while he delved into his entrepreneurial pursuits. They had an abundance of finances, but unfortunately, they failed to save. Desires to acquire something excessive but pleasant right now always emerged. "It seems neither of us considered the need to save. In case of anything, my parents will be able to help," Liam would assert to his young wife every time the topic of their financial future arose. However, for Layla, it remained a mystery whether this statement was true or just a ploy. Both of them believed that a critical situation would never arise. However, after some time, something strange happened with Liam's business. Layla didn't have full clarity on the details, but she noticed that his income started decreasing until his enterprise finally faced a complete catastrophe, crumbling to the ground. Suddenly, it emerged that Liam's parents refused to help the young family. "We still have younger children who can't provide for themselves, and you are a grown man, solve your own problems," his father sternly declared. This news was shocking for Liam, who had expected support from his parents in this difficult moment. The necessity to sell their luxurious, spacious apartment, where they used to live, and move to a modest two-bedroom residence on the outskirts of the city was a tough trial for them. Liam seemed visibly dissatisfied with the new situation. His discontent was evident, possibly influenced by the luxury he was accustomed to, affecting his attitude towards this change. On the other hand, Layla embraced this upheaval with philosophical calmness. She had long emerged from poverty but remembered those difficult times. Thanks to that experience, she was better prepared for hardships and knew how to act in challenging circumstances. Her wisdom and composure helped them adapt to the new life and cope with the challenges they had to face. Layla quickly found a job as a saleswoman in a store, despite the modest salary. For her, it was a better option than remaining unemployed. Liam, on the other hand, took a different path, plunging into heavy drinking, getting lost in the turbulent whirlpool of alcohol. Despite the difficulties, Layla didn't blame her husband and tried to support him. Her efforts bore fruit, and at one point, Liam stopped drinking and began nurturing new ideas for his business. These ideas became the foundation for the family to restore their former prosperity and wealth. However, Liam's ideas constantly failed him. Even if he managed to gather the initial capital for launching a new venture, various difficulties soon emerged, shattering all his plans. Over time, the man's character became increasingly unbearable, and his constant failures only intensified the tension within the family. "I don't have enough money for a full realization of my projects," Liam admitted candidly to Layla. "But what can I do, dear?" she replied. "I already take all possible extra shifts, work practically without weekends. There just isn't any more time I can find for earning. Of course, if I had finished university, it would have been easier, but can't lament the past now, can we? This must be a lesson for both of us. I need to finish my education and find a proper job. But these are plans for the future, once we get out of. But how are we going to do it?" her husband complained. "Well, to increase our income," Layla gently retorted, "you could find some additional work, even if it's just for half a day." "I don't have time for that," Liam asserted categorically. "If you haven't noticed, while you're working for peanuts, I'm trying to rebuild the business and restore our previous life, but you're not helping me with that." "But I'm doing everything I can," Layla replied, surprised. "No, you haven't done one crucial thing," her husband retorted. "Even though I explained to you how important it is for both me and yourself. Darling, perhaps you're overlooking the fact that even though I don't have a complete education, I still studied economics. The proposal you're suggesting seems too risky to me. Maybe it's worth trusting me in matters where I have understanding." "It's just that you doubt my abilities," Layla responded hesitantly. "Do you think that just because I made a mistake, it means I'll keep repeating them? I won't be able to achieve anything good anymore," Liam sadly remarked. As a result of such discussions, Layla constantly tried to persuade her husband that he was wrong and that she should be trusted more in matters where she had competence. However, all these conversations yielded no results and soon began anew. Liam proposed a simple solution: to take out a large loan in Layla's name and invest the money in the business, since he, being bankrupt and officially unemployed, had no chance of getting a loan from the bank himself. But Layla staunchly refused this idea, fearing it would only deepen their financial troubles. She insisted that he consider ways to repay the loan in case of failure. Layla was convinced it would only compound their problems and didn't yield to her husband's persuasions. Then came a time when Layla became pregnant, and Liam had to set aside his business plans to find a job and provide for the family. It wasn't in line with his desires, but both spouses believed it was a temporary measure. Layla planned to return to work when the child entered daycare, but she found out there were no available spots, so she couldn't return to work as soon as they had planned. When Mateo turned 3 years old, and Layla became pregnant for the second time, the situation only worsened. 2 children were born, and only then did Liam start talking about how it would be beneficial for her to return to work. Strolling through the familiar streets in the night's silence, Layla was immersed in her heavy thoughts and memories. The neighborhood, which had become almost familiar to her over the years, was on the outskirts of the city but was considered safe, so even at such a late hour, moving around was secure. However, Layla, tormented by conflicts with her husband and overwhelmed by the family situation, felt emotionally distant from the sense of safety. On this night, as her musings grew deeper, something unusual caught her attention. Layla, preoccupied with her own problems, initially didn't immediately grasp what disrupted her peace. An undefined anxiety awakened in her subconscious, as if a neon sign had lit up somewhere, heralding something out of the ordinary in the surrounding space. Distracted from her thoughts, Layla glanced around and quickly discovered the cause of her unease. Sitting on the curb was a little girl, the same age as her son Mateo, dressed in a smart pink dress. The girl curiously examined the asphalt beneath her feet, surrounded by silence and seclusion. In this neighborhood, Layla rarely encountered homeless children, especially at such a late hour. It was predominantly inhabited by decent families who didn't allow their children to roam the streets alone at night. Moreover, the girl didn't look like a street urchin. Her entirely new, clean, and fashionable clothing did not fit the typical appearance of homeless youngsters. This unexpected incident greatly surprised Layla, yet at that moment, all these details seemed secondary to her. Full realization came much later when she recalled this strange encounter. At that moment, her primary concern was to assist the child who was left alone on the street at such a late hour, and therefore potentially in danger. Following this thought, she cautiously approached the girl, crouching down to establish eye-level contact. She tried to speak softly and amiably, initiating the conversation with a question. "Hi, what's your name?" The girl calmly replied, "I don't remember." This astonished Layla. "Do you know who your parents are and where they are?" She continued. "I don't remember, I have no memories," the girl replied. Layla tried to inquire further, "What do you remember, then?" But the girl just silently shook her head. "How did you end up here?" Layla asked. "I don't remember, I just woke up there," the girl replied indifferently, gesturing towards where she came from. "Was there a forest or a park?" Layla continued inquiring. "I don't remember, I just woke up and don't remember anything, I just walked and got tired," the girl answered. All this unusual situation troubled Layla, and she felt unsure. After a short pause, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded eagerly, indicating that she hadn't eaten for a long time. "Okay, let's go to my place," Layla said. "I'll make you some food, and then you can spend the night at my house with my children. In the morning, we'll figure out what to do next. And to make it easier, let's pretend your name is Mila. Would that be more comfortable for you?" The girl indifferently replied, "Yes." Thus, Layla decided to temporarily help the girl and invited her to spend the night at her home with her children to sort out the situation in the morning. Layla firmly grabbed the girl's hand and headed towards her home. All her personal concerns and problems instantly took a back seat. This was how her inner self operated. If someone needed help, her own difficulties moved to the background. This was especially evident in her as a mother. The situation with the homeless child who couldn't even remember her name tore at her soul. When they safely reached her apartment, the clock showed around 2 in the morning. To her surprise, all the family members were peacefully asleep in their beds. Inside Layla, a strange feeling of resentment stirred. No one in her family had been concerned about where she was at such a late hour. Nevertheless, she understood that this situation couldn't possibly please her family. Explaining to the children, and especially to her husband, why the girl was at Layla's apartment and how she got there was unacceptable. Quietly, she headed to the kitchen, took out leftovers from dinner in the refrigerator, and fed the girl. After the girl had eaten and began yawning desperately, a clear sign of exhaustion from not only not eating for a long time but also not sleeping for an extended period, Layla decided to arrange her on the couch while she herself prepared to lie on the floor. Today had been so exhausting that she felt the weariness settling in and soon fell asleep carelessly, forgetting to set her alarm. Usually, she was the first one up in the family, preparing breakfast, seeing her husband off to work, and getting her eldest son ready for school. Layla was an early riser, accustomed to it, finding not only comfort but satisfaction in it. However, waking up without an alarm in such circumstances proved exceedingly difficult. Layla was jolted awake by a sharp shake on her shoulder. Lifting her eyes, she saw Liam's irritated face. "I'm running late for work," he exclaimed, noticing her lying on the kitchen floor. "Breakfast isn't ready. You're still sleeping, and not even in bed but on the kitchen floor. And who's the girl snoring on our couch?" At first, Layla didn't even realize who he was referring to, but then remembered her nocturnal adventure and attempted to explain. He listened to her with a rather skeptical expression. "By the time I come back from work, Mila shouldn't be in our house anymore," Liam declared and hurried off to work without even glancing at the kitchen. Layla tried to collect herself, but even this simple act proved elusive for her. After a few minutes, she realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to wake up Mateo, let alone take him to school. The little one was peacefully asleep in his crib, and Layla realized that if Liam was already late for work, it was high time for Mateo to leave the house. For the first time that morning, glancing at the clock, she grabbed her head in horror. Her son's first lesson was starting in 10 minutes. Waking up Mateo, she quickly prepared a simple breakfast for him and sent him off to class. Luckily, the school was nearby, and the boy could manage this journey independently. But Layla knew he would still be late. It heralded problems that could also affect her. However, at that moment, she didn't plan to dwell on that as other immediate difficulties lay ahead. Fortunately, all the noise and hustle in the house over the last half hour hadn't disturbed Mila's peaceful sleep. Her rescuer decided to wait, preferring the girl to wake up on her own, occupied with her own children, contemplating the steps to be taken. The girl only got up 2 hours later, by which time Layla had already devised a clear plan of action. It was time for a walk with the little ones, and she decided to take Mila along to visit the nearest police station. After all, law enforcement agencies existed precisely to investigate such cases. "So, you found this girl on the street last night?" the officer at the station clarified. "Exactly," confirmed Layla. However, she wasn't entirely clear about the purpose. She had already recounted the whole story and filed a report. Nevertheless, the police officer seemed to reconfirm what had already been thoroughly explained. "Why didn't you contact the police immediately?" the policeman asked in surprise. "I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that this was what I needed to do," replied Layla. Mila seemed oblivious to the current situation or didn't attach much importance to it, engrossed in examining the room, although, in Layla's opinion, there was nothing particularly engaging or even beautiful about it. "What are you planning to do with this child?" asked the policeman. "What do you mean?" Layla was surprised. This question caught her off guard. She sincerely believed that the girl's fate was now in the hands of law enforcement. "We can place her in a special institution or let her stay with you for now," the officer replied indifferently. Layla's vision darkened. The choice they presented to her was unbearable. Good day, dear viewers. I want to tell you that this part of the story is the next episode of the previous video, the link to which I will leave in the comments of this video. On one hand, her husband was clear that girl shouldn't be here by the evening. Layla herself realized they couldn't handle another child, struggling as they were. All of that was clear and logical. But the other side of the coin, words like special institution, orphanage was unacceptable to Layla. She remembered how hard it had been for her to live and grow up in an orphanage, bullying from other children and harsh punishments from caregivers. It was all in her past, but she was accustomed to hardships from a very young age. Mila, on the other hand, seemed entirely different. Apparently, she was from a caring family, perhaps a bit spoiled. She had an obvious psychological trauma, not remembering her past or even her real name. Layla could tell that the girl wouldn't survive in the harsh conditions of an orphanage. At that moment, the woman didn't have time for lengthy contemplation, but it became her motivation to make a decision. Looking squarely at the officer, she firmly stated, "The girl will live with us." The policeman, hearing this response, showed candor. "I grew up in an orphanage myself, and I don't think that's the place for this girl." "That's exactly what I thought," Layla replied coldly. "Leaving her with you isn't entirely within the rules, but I will try to resolve this matter. If we find out anything about the girl's relatives, we'll call you, but honestly, I'd advise you to start your own search. Sometimes the internet can be more helpful than the police," advised the officer. When Layla returned to her cozy home, where an atmosphere of tranquility reigned, she noticed Mateo, shaken and upset. The boy had just returned from school and sadly showed his mother his diary, where his tardiness and a note from the teacher were recorded. "I'm sorry, Mom," whispered her son. "I should have woken up by myself." "No, you shouldn't have," Layla replied. "You know waking everyone up in the mornings is my responsibility. It's not just a rule, it's an agreement between us. So, if anything, I should apologize to you." From their conversation, it was evident that there was no extra girl in the apartment. Mateo stayed silent, but his expression betrayed confusion. Layla, looking at her son, pondered again how lucky she was to have such carefree and trouble-free child. Leaving the younger ones under the supervision of the elder, Layla started preparing lunch. After the meal, when the girls went back to their room, her son approached her with a pressing question. "Mom, will Mila stay with us?" "I asked her, but she hasn't made up her mind yet," Layla replied. "This girl needs our help, she's lost. If we don't give her shelter, she'll end up in an orphanage." "That's great that she'll stay," Mateo suddenly remarked. "Why?" his mother asked, surprised. "The little ones like her," the son replied seriously. "So, it'll be easier for both of us now." Layla affectionately patted his head and responded with a bright laugh. Then she resumed her usual household chores, laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband's return. She avoided thoughts about what would happen when her husband returned from work. but an unexpected quarrel surpassed all her expectations. "What is this?" he almost shouted, pacing back and forth through the kitchen. "You're not satisfied with our kids, now you're bringing another one." "She wasn't just brought in," Layla defended the girl. "And it's temporary until we find her parents. We can't leave her in an orphanage. Look at her, she's absolutely a home child. That's not the place for her. There are special facilities for such cases, while here, she can find her family." "What do you know about the expenses related to children?" exclaimed Layla. "Have you ever bought anything for them? Can you imagine the needs of a child?" She herself didn't understand what had prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps years of accumulated resentment needed an outlet. Her husband listened to her angry tirade silently, not attempting to interrupt or argue. He seemed surprised by such sharpness from his usually affectionate and calm wife, even in conflict situations. Layla expressed everything that had accumulated within her, about finances, relationships, love, and romance, noting that the money he earned clearly wasn't enough for life. She reminded him of various luxurious purchases he made after the children were born, while she had to meticulously count every penny to provide the entire family with food and clothing. She wasn't demanding lavish gifts or bouquets of flowers. She simply longed for human attention, warmth, and involvement. Instead, she was continually faced with unfair reproaches. "Well," Liam said in an absolutely calm tone after Layla finished her emotional monologue, "I suppose everyone will be much better off without me." This ominous statement hung in the air, and the man didn't utter another word. He silently began packing his belongings into a large suitcase from the bedroom closet. Layla, perhaps, should have started crying, apologizing to her husband, pleading with him not to make hasty decisions, and expressing her love for him, all things she would have done without hesitation just 2 days ago. However, now she watched what was happening with a cool detachment that seemed to engulf her. Liam was slowly getting ready, occasionally glancing at Layla. He seemed to expect her usual reactions or maybe tried to frighten her even more than he actually intended to leave. However, his plan didn't work, and by the time the suitcase was ready, he couldn't turn back. "Fine then," the engineer muttered, slamming the front door shut. Layla spent a few more minutes in the kitchen, then waved her hand and headed to the children's room. There, Mila and Mateo were trying to calm down the younger ones, who were clearly frightened by what was happening in the kitchen. The older children were as pale as a sheet, but feeling their responsibility, they tried not to panic and maintain calmness among the younger ones. The woman hugged all 4 children tightly. "Daddy won't come back anymore?" Mateo finally asked. Layla noticed there was not a drop of regret in his voice, rather, indifference. He didn't care whether Dad would return or not. This man, rarely at home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know, to be honest," she replied. "Maybe he'll come back at some point." So, they remained, living as a group of 5, 4 children and Layla herself. If initially she feared she wouldn't cope without her husband's help, she soon discovered it wasn't the case. Without constant arguments and strange demands, life became much easier and calmer. And this was despite the fact that money hadn't really increased. Liam allocated only a small amount from his salary for household expenses, while Layla covered most of it from her maternity and child benefits. However, soon there came a time when the initial benefits were due to end, which posed certain problems. Layla realized that working full-time with 4 young children was practically impossible. However, her husband leaving pushed her to find the strength and time to gradually start looking for opportunities to work, even if only part-time. And unexpectedly, a few fortunate occurrences came her way. First, the director from the daycare where she awaited her children's enrollment called. Without disclosing anything over the phone, she strongly urged Layla to come to the daycare for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began. "As I understand, you've been waiting for your children to join our daycare for quite some time. It's taking so long that one of your children has already started school," Layla responded somewhat irritatedly. "Allow me to tell you a secret," noted the director. "By the time your turn comes, your youngest daughter will also make it. Many never get into our daycare. We have far more applications than spots, so don't be angry with me. It's not my initiative, and I can't change this situation." "So, did you invite me just to inform me of the lack of chances?" asked Layla. "Quite the opposite. I invited you to propose a solution to this situation. You see, one of our nursery nurses recently left, and we've had instability in this position for a long time. Finding a replacement is challenging. Our staff are struggling and on the verge of falling apart. I decided to offer this vacancy to those who have long been waiting in line. There's a lot of work, the pay isn't high, but we'll be able to immediately accept your children into the appropriate age group. And why are you choosing me specifically? Layla asks suspiciously. I don't even have a pedagogical education. Surely, there are more suitable candidates. You have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in your situation, that's much more important. However, we've proposed this not only to you, as you put it, more suitable candidates, but none of them agreed. We've compiled a list of those who might be interested in such work, and you're not the first to whom we're offering this opportunity. Does this offer suit you? This option suited Layla. Now, she had some work that she could combine with taking care of her younger children. The older children were independent enough to spend a few hours at home without her presence and prepare their own lunch. Moreover, the daycare was conveniently located close to both their school and home, and even though their life wasn't ideal, they managed no worse than before Liam left. Life started to normalize, and after some time, another fortunate event occurred. This time, Layla called the same police officer to her home who a few weeks ago had taken her statement when she found Mila on the street. Any news about her parents? Layla inquired hopefully. Unfortunately, nothing new, replied the police officer. As I mentioned before, we don't have much information about her. Have you tried finding out something on your own? No, I haven't had the time for that, the woman shrugged. You know, apart from her, I have 3 other children. And recently, my husband left. I see, sighed the police officer. But the point is, I called you for a very specific reason. I've officially arranged for Mila to reside with you. Now, you can enroll her in school and so forth. Great, Layla thanked. It was really difficult that Mila couldn't attend school. I've been educating her on my own, but I understand the need to sort this out before the start of the next academic year. Summer was fast approaching, signifying an imminent need. Yes, among other things, you're now Mila's official guardian, the police officer noted. This entails certain allowances. Also, as I understand, given your large family, you may be eligible for various benefits and assistance. As the police officer had said, it turned out, of course, there was never enough money for everything. But now Layla could be assured that her children would be clothed, fed, and sent to school. Contrary to her fears, life didn't collapse after Liam's departure, not only financially but also emotionally. However hard she tried, she couldn't muster any emotions about his leaving. It seemed that something inside her burned out at the moment when her husband recklessly accused her of an imaginary infidelity. Such lack of reaction surprised Layla herself, but at the same time, it couldn't help but bring her a sense of satisfaction. With 4 children to care for, the anguish associated with a shattered love affair would have been highly inappropriate. Perhaps the children became the source of her inner peace. With all the responsibilities, she had no time to sink into sadness and despair. Another 2 years passed. To accommodate the comfort of all family members, a provisional decision was made to divide the apartment into 2 parts, one for the males and one for the females. Mila and the youngest, Riley, moved into the room where the adults used to stay, while Mateo remained in his room with his brother, Jackson. It was a bit cramped, but it didn't pose significant problems. The friendship between Mila and Mateo grew stronger with each passing day. They now attended the same school, despite the girl being a year younger. Mateo treated her like a younger sister, showing care and support. Mila also developed warm and friendly relations with the younger children. Despite her unexpected arrival, Mila seamlessly integrated into the family atmosphere. For Layla, she became like a biological daughter, and at times, the woman forgot that this was not the actual case. From Mila's side, she quickly accustomed herself to calling Layla mom and her children brothers and sisters. The day when the girl was found, they decided to celebrate as her 2nd birthday. For Layla, it held a particular symbolic meaning, as no one knew what could have happened to Mila if she hadn't been rescued. In a sense, it could be said that the horrific scene Liam created that evening saved the girl from an even more tragic fate. Layla, rejoicing in Mila's newfound status as her daughter, couldn't stop wondering why nobody was searching for the child. Following the police officer's advice, she posted advertisements about the found girl, but to no avail. Even law enforcement authorities couldn't trace her parents. Layla worried that the girl hadn't returned to her family. She couldn't comprehend why Mila had no memories before waking up in the park. It gave the impression as if, until that moment, Mila simply didn't exist in this world. Of course, this seemed impossible, and Layla desperately wanted to uncover the truth about the girl's past. But the doctors at the regular clinic just shrugged. They had never encountered such complex cases and didn't know what to do in such a situation. The only thing one of them could suggest was contacts for a good private clinic specializing in aiding children who had lost their memory. However, of course, the family didn't have the money for such services. Mila herself, without memories of the past, didn't worry about it. She lived in the present moment, childishly naive, delighting in each new day, only knowing that today was good. What came before didn't hold much significance for her. This also puzzled Layla, and in a way, she envied her foster daughter. In her own childhood, Layla also wished to know about her parents and why they were no longer with her. She even made her caregiver uncomfortable with her questions, to the point where she had to respond to her directly and honestly. They were alcoholics, useless, and you're just the same. Then they died. Do you find the answer satisfactory? Now go clean the toilets, it's your turn today. Recalling this moment, Layla sometimes thought perhaps it was good that Mila wasn't interested in her past. But when she found the girl, Mila didn't seem like a child who had had a rough life. Quite the opposite. Sometimes she thought that living with her biological family might have been much more pleasant and cozier for Mila. But Layla couldn't change this situation, despite all her efforts. Gradually, she reconciled with the thought that they probably wouldn't ever learn the whole truth about the past. At that moment, she finally resolved that Mila wasn't just temporarily living with her but was an integral part of her family. The question arose about not just being her guardian but permanently adopting the child. However, a strange and simultaneously sorrowful legal intricacy emerged. While still officially married, Layla had to make the tough decision to get a divorce because, without her husband's agreement, she couldn't adopt Mila. This meant only one thing: the necessity to start divorce proceedings. With a heavy heart, she dialed Liam's number. Layla absolutely didn't want to communicate with this person, and she would have preferred a divorce through the court. But that would take much more time. And she hoped for an amicable separation to part ways with her ex-husband, not just practically but also officially, without having any contact with him for 2 years. Layla, finally heard from you. Liam's affectionate voice came through the phone. I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you. Layla felt a strange mix of emotions that wouldn't let her define her feelings. On one hand, Liam's words touched her heart, as if soothing a sore spot, yet they brought a certain sweet discomfort. The tone in which he spoke to her seemed to penetrate her memory, invoking those happy times before all the tragic events that had affected them both. His words hinted at their past, swirling her in a vortex of pleasant memories. However, on the other hand, such an address now seemed excessively inappropriate and out of place. I knew you missed me and that eventually you'd make the right decision, Liam continued, as if persuading her with inspiration. Are you really willing to leave your husband because of some street girl? You're calling now to say that the problem is solved. I'll be back, and all those happy memories will return like magic. Her husband's last words abruptly brought Layla back to the time when he left, and she didn't feel particularly upset about it. His words reminded her of the reason for their separation. She responded with the coldest tone possible. Liam, I'm calling to ask for a divorce. So, have you already found yourself a new man? His voice suddenly lost all its previous tenderness. You're jumping to conclusions. I haven't found anyone, and besides, it's none of your business. Ever since you left me with 4 kids without support, as you said back then, we've managed just fine without you. And now, I want to finalize this last formality. I didn't abandon you, the woman declared indignantly. I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with that girl, and I couldn't take on any more responsibility. I walked out of your life until you sorted out that issue, the husband retorted. Believe me, I've resolved all my problems except one, which is why I'm calling you. Let's end this useless conversation. Liam, you're no longer needed by me or my kids. Layla was left stunned by what she heard. Could it be that he really wouldn't agree to a divorce? And would he threaten to deprive her and the kids of their only corner if she insisted? These weren't the romantic and loving newlyweds she once married. Despite all this, she had no other way out. She tried to peacefully negotiate with her husband several times but realized all her efforts were futile. There were only 2 options: either she gets rid of Mila and Liam comes back home, or a divorce through court with his share of the apartment. There was nothing else on the table that he was willing to consider. I understand you need time to recover, he said in one of those conversations. I'm not rushing to make a decision, but since you've chosen to talk to me, bear in mind, I expect this decision from you, and even my patience has its limits. Layla didn't want to prolong this process, maintaining the status quo. It was evident that this couldn't be dragged on indefinitely. It needed a resolution now. Just like the official adoption of Mila, the divorce was a formality. But what if, for instance, she wanted to remarry again? After lengthy contemplation, Layla made the decision to file for divorce. However, before that, she tried to explain to the children that changes in their living conditions might occur and they might have to temporarily move to a one-bedroom apartment. She was pleasantly surprised and relieved to see that the kids understood the situation. Liam attempted to claim his share of the apartment through court, but his demand was rejected by the court. They explained that all the children lived with their mother, and dividing the apartment was impossible until some of the children moved in with their father. The room fell into a tense silence. The children were too young for their opinions to be considered. Everything depended on Liam's decision. He could agree to the proposal, in which case the children would stay with their mother, but he would be entitled to compensation for his share of the apartment. The decision turned out to be the only possible compromise in this complex situation. Despite this, Layla had to pay in installments for many years, considering her modest income and the number of dependents. This decision, though unsatisfactory for both parties, turned out to be the only possible compromise. For Layla's family, the situation emerged as a victory, one the children perceived as such. But unexpectedly for them, the legal process seemed frightening, especially the idea of separation and the prospect of living with a father whom the younger ones couldn't even remember. Now that all that was behind them, the children were rejoicing. Layla, having become a completely free woman and the longtime guardian of Mila, managed, though with difficulty, to achieve the official adoption of the girl. This became a reason for a celebration from their perspective. The essential components were supposed to be an affordable but delicious store-bought cake and a trip to the amusement park. None of them had visited such a place before. Each of them had dreamed of being there at least once. For 3 months, the woman bought everything she could just to gather enough money for this trip and give her children a genuine entertainment. And finally, the long-awaited day arrived. The kids looked around with interest, trying to decide which of the various amusements they'd like to try. Of course, it wasn't possible to go on all the attractions at once, and fortunately, even the youngest understood these limitations. Only Mila, usually noisy and cheerful, behaved unusually quietly. She looked around with a strange expression on her face, as if surprised why she was there, but this surprise was completely different from everyone else's. "Mila, are you okay?" Layla asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, everything's fine," she replied in a quiet and colorless voice. This surprised the woman even more. The child's intonation didn't match the meaning of her words, which was unusual for Mila, an open and trusting girl. She typically didn't hide her emotions, so her attempt to do so failed, causing more concern to her foster mother. Nevertheless, Layla decided not to continue the dialogue. She realized that if Mila had reasons to conceal her feelings, the child would eventually share them in her own time. No matter how much Layla pleaded, she realized that pushing would only deepen the girl's seclusion. There was a significant chance that she herself would feel the desire to share her feelings. As it happened, the children, Layla's biological kids, were completely absorbed in the atmosphere around them, debating which ride to try first. Eventually, they reached a consensus and headed towards the Ferris wheel. Mila suddenly declined the suggestion to join them, explaining her refusal with a fear of heights. No one tried to persuade her. Along with Layla, they sat on a bench from where they could clearly see the cabin of the Ferris wheel where the others set off. Good day, dear viewers. I want to tell you that this part of the story is the next episode of the previous video, the link to which I will leave in the comments of this video. For a while, an awkward silence prevailed, after which the girl broke it with a sentence that her foster mother least expected to hear. "Mom, please don't be mad at me," she began and suddenly paused, squinting her eyes, trying to discern Layla's response in her expression. "Have I ever been mad at you?" Layla responded in surprise. "No," Mila softly and embarrassedly replied. "But now, maybe. Why, Mom, what happened? You know, since we came to this park, I feel like I know it, like I've been here before," Mila continued, pausing again. There was a hint of hope in her words. "Really, our memory's starting to come back. Maybe my real parents used to bring me here, or to a similar place, and now the atmosphere is helping me remember. Why would I be mad at that? And if I do remember my childhood, and my real parents, what's wrong with that? Then we'll find out what happened to you. Maybe we'll even find them and tell them that you're safe. But they might want to take me away," Mila exclaimed, as if shrinking in terror. "It won't be easy," Layla tried to reassure her. "You'll soon be 9, or maybe even older, we're not sure. Legal procedures take a long time, you've seen how lengthy it all can be. And without the court, nothing can be done." and after you turn 10, you can choose where you want to live. Maybe you'll like your birth parents more than me." "Really?" Mila furrowed her brows. "How can you know?" "They left me," the girl stated with childlike certainty. "Maybe they didn't leave, but lost you and are still looking." Layla tried to offer an alternative. "Anyway, I've grown accustomed to you all, to you, your brothers, and sister. I tried not to remember the past. To move forward." Mila fell into powerless silence, yet Layla keenly sensed her inner conflict, imagining the complexity before her choice. She probably loved her true parents, and if she remembered them, emotions and feelings could rekindle. However, she had already formed a special bond with her new family, almost as if they were her own. "Listen, let's consider this more gently," Layla began. "You think you have only two paths. But, in reality, there are many more options. If we suddenly find your real parents, you don't have to immediately part with us. You can always come visit, play with your brothers and sister, and do so quite often, I'm sure. Regardless of who they are, if they love you and understand that it's more comfortable for you, they won't interfere." Mila widened her eyes in surprise. Such a perspective seemed foreign to her mind, but now thoughts slowly began to flow in that direction, and the girl felt a bit reassured. Realizing the situation wasn't as dire as she assumed, Layla, unfortunately, didn't share the same confident feeling. Her own certainty in the fairness of her comforting words was now in question. The conversation might have prolonged, but it was interrupted by a park attendant, dressed in uniform and holding a broom. Despite his somewhat unfriendly appearance, his speech was polite and devoid of aggression. "Sorry for the intrusion, but your daughter seems very familiar to me. Is she by any chance Gianna?" he unexpectedly inquired. The word Gianna made the girl flinch. Mixed emotions and confusion crossed her face. She began to scrutinize the person attentively, as if trying to remember where she might have seen him before. "We're not sure, we can't rule out that possibility," Layla responded cautiously. 3 years ago, this girl was found quite far from here. She was wandering the streets at an unusual time for a child. She didn't remember anything about her past and, unfortunately, still hasn't remembered. 3 years ago," exclaimed the janitor in amazement. "Sorry for interrupting, but it was exactly then that I, and other people, saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger, but the resemblance is striking." "Please, start from the beginning," requested Layla. As the janitor gathered his thoughts, the children returning from the Ferris wheel were approaching. However, by his mother's look, Mateo understood that something serious was happening and decided not to intervene in the conversation. He led the younger children to other attractions, sensing that something was amiss. The family frequented this park, as he later learned, but at that time, he didn't attach much significance to it. They used to come here often, the family, father, mother, and a little girl. The janitor began, finally gathering his thoughts for the story, but then they seemed to disappear. "I didn't pay much attention to it, assumed maybe they chose another park they liked more or something of that sort." Around that time, new entertainment places started popping up in the city. "And then," Mila inquired, listening attentively to his words. "Then I noticed an advertisement in the newspaper about the girl's disappearance. The parents offered a substantial reward for any information about her whereabouts, but as far as I know, they never found her," replied the janitor. "Do you have that newspaper with the article?" Layla asked, experiencing mixed feelings, fear and hope. "No, the newspaper is no longer available," the janitor replied. "But if you need contacts, I kept them just in case." He retrieved an old push-button phone and dictated the number to Layla. "It would be wonderful if you turned out to be Gianna," he addressed Mila. Her parents, as far as I saw, searched intensely for her. As Mila and Layla walked their way home, their hearts beat faster than usual, as if they were getting closer to solving the long-awaited mystery that had tormented them for 3 years. Perhaps the answer they sought was already within their grasp, but neither of them could foresee the consequences it might bring. Mateo sensed that something was amiss, yet he decided not to pry with excessive questions. He made a conscious effort to distract the younger ones, preventing them from insisting on a conversation that could have interfered. Layla spent several days glued to her phone, oscillating between dialing the long-awaited number and abruptly canceling the call, as if lacking the resolve for this step. Her concern wasn't so much about what she might discover but about how to initiate this complex conversation. But at a certain moment, gathering all her inner strength, she finally made that decisive step into the unknown. With some hesitation but with a determined resolve, she dialed the number that could change everything. "Hello, how can I help you?" A pleasant male voice responded after a few rings, filling the conversation with anticipation. "Hello," Layla began, taking a sharp breath and continuing resolutely. "My name is Layla. I'm calling about your daughter who disappeared almost 3 years ago." "What?" The male voice immediately changed, reflecting surprise and puzzlement. The man seemed stunned by what he heard, unsure of how to react. "What information could this unfamiliar woman provide me?" he asked, trying to understand the situation. "You see, perhaps she has been under my care all this time and was recently adopted by me. I cannot say for sure because the girl, for some reason, lost her memory and had no slightest idea about her relatives," Layla explained, trying to convey the gravity of the situation. "I don't want to give you false hope, but a few days ago, she seems to have been recognized by a janitor from the amusement park." This conversation prompted everyone to join in the quest for truth, leaving many questions unanswered and filling the air with tension over the potential reunion. "I think it's necessary for us to meet and discuss everything," the man croaked, his voice filled with tension and caution. "You're right, but I would prefer the first meeting to take place without the involvement of the girl." Shortly after this conversation, Layla's heart raced with excitement as she crossed the threshold of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, the chosen location for the upcoming meeting. The man was already waiting at the designated table. Perhaps he was 10 years older than Layla, yet it didn't diminish his attractiveness. In this refined setting, he looked simply magnificent. "Hello again," she said, taking her seat opposite him, feeling a sense of respect and apprehension within herself. He silently nodded, without uttering a word, retrieved a folder from his briefcase, and placed it on the table. Carefully, he slid it toward his conversation partner. In turn, she handed him several simple film photographs featuring Mila. Opening the folder, Layla discovered that the stranger had the same idea as her. He brought along several snapshots of his daughter, apparently taken shortly before her disappearance, in the same amusement park. In one of the photos, she posed in the pink dress she wore on the night the woman found her on the street. Undoubtedly, the images clearly showed Mila's face. Layla lacked photos of the girl from that time, and her hands were only the most recent snapshots taken with a recently purchased inexpensive camera from one of the online classified portals. Despite this, the man unmistakably recognized his daughter. "This is Gianna," he whispered. "My goodness, she's alive. And as far as I know, she's perfectly healthy, except for the memory loss. Sadly, I couldn't provide the level of life she was accustomed to, but the alternative was an orphanage. I decided that even my modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts was better than that." The man immersed himself in silence again, and Layla didn't disturb it. She understood the invisible storm raging in this person's soul. Finally, after some calming down, he managed to form words into sentences. "I never introduced myself. I'm Oliver. Pleasure to meet you," Layla automatically responded. Oliver hesitated, apologized for it, and expressed gratitude for her taking his girl under her care. "Yes, I've been trying to find her parents for quite a while, but it seems we somehow went separate ways," she cautiously began. Oliver listened attentively. "Have you contacted the police?" he asked. "Unfortunately, yes, she lost her memory," replied Layla. "I took her to doctors, but they couldn't help either. Although, when we were in that park, she seemed to start recognizing the place. Maybe if she sees you, it might help her retrieve the rest of her memories." "I'd like to believe that," responded Oliver, sinking back into heavy thoughts. "There's another issue," continued Oliver, realizing the importance of this matter. "The girl lived with us as part of our family. She has grown very attached to my children and me. I insist that they continue to interact unless, of course, you intend to take her away. I have a proposal for you," he said. "If you're not too attached to your job, we might come to an agreement, taking all circumstances into account. I am a man burdened by loneliness, engulfed in the whirlwind of work-related anxieties. It seems doubtful that I will be able to dedicate the necessary time to my beloved child. Due to all the events I've experienced, I've become engulfed in a whirlwind of work obligations. I have at my disposal an extensive estate on the outskirts of the city. I propose that you move in with me along with your children. Your calling will be to take care of them attentively, with accommodation provided for you. Don't worry about schooling, you will have the option to send the children there with a personal driver. By the way, next to our residence is an elite educational institution. We can place not only Gianna but also any possible new siblings there. You mentioned having several of your own children, correct? That's correct, confirmed Layla. 3 of them, and 2 of them are supposed to start school this year. Are you in agreement with this arrangement? The offer is undoubtedly appealing, pondered Layla in response. However, I have one question. The park's janitor mentioned that you always appeared there together. Where is your wife? Oliver lowered his gaze to the table, concealing his emotions, but something appeared in his eyes that Layla couldn't help but notice. Tears welled up, betraying themselves. It was only now that she realized how inappropriate and foolish her previous question was. They had experienced the loss of a child, perhaps believing that their daughter was no longer alive. What terrible thoughts could have swirled in the mother's mind under such dreadful circumstances? Gianna was a late but very much desired child for us. She was our treasure with my wife. We dreamt of having a large family. However, for a long time, it didn't happen, and finally, our daughter came to us. The doctors warned that Lily's body wouldn't withstand another childbirth. Then our only daughter disappeared, and only now have we found her. My poor wife passed away just a few months after Gianna disappeared. She fell ill right after our daughter went missing and departed from this world. I apologize, Layla softly spoke. My sincere condolences for your loss. He silently nodded, taking a sip of water from the glass in front of him. They spent several agonizing minutes in an awkward silence. Wanting to move away from the painful topic, they began discussing the details of the move and the upcoming meeting between Mila and her biological father, Gianna. Upon returning home, Layla strictly adhered to her action plan. Her own children perceived the move to the vast estate as a real magical adventure. Even Mateo, usually reserved and serious, could barely contain his excitement. The only one who didn't show any enthusiasm was Mila. She still didn't remember her father and was afraid of the upcoming meeting with him. Additionally, she was deeply upset by the news of her mother's death. I don't remember her now, Mila told Layla, and I'm not even sad. But if I do remember, I'll probably be very upset. That's why I decided to tell you about this in advance, so you'd be prepared when you remember, the woman replied. Another 2 weeks passed before the family was fully prepared for the upcoming move. And then came the day when Mila was supposed to meet her biological father. All participants and witnesses to this event, except for little Riley and Jackson, were deeply moved. Even Mateo was very concerned about his sister. Oliver arranged for the transportation of belongings and sent his personal driver for the family. Throughout the journey, the girl was tense, nervous, unable to focus on anything. However, when they left the city limits, she suddenly froze. She stared out the window, as if recognizing the passing landscapes. And as the car approached the huge mansion, she unexpectedly screamed loudly. Oliver, whose feelings were no less tumultuous than his daughter's, awaited them, standing right at the doorstep. The little girl got out of the car and suddenly paused, directing her gaze alternately at him and the enormous house before her. Her stepfather approached her but hesitated, remaining still, nervously shifting from one foot to the other. Mila, seemingly deciding to approach him herself, said in a semi-questioning tone, "Dad, Gianna, sweetheart, do you remember me?" He tried to contain his desire to embrace the child, fearing to scare her. In his eyes, one could see him grappling with the desire. After all, he realized that to her, he might mostly be a stranger. Despite being told he was her father, she probably didn't remember him and harbored no feelings towards him. "I feel like I remember something, but I'm not sure, maybe it's just my thoughts," the girl mysteriously whispered, allowing doubts and confusion to seep through her fingers. Unable to contain the emotional strain, tears streamed down her cheeks, like an unhindered flow of emotions. Layla and Mateo quickly came to her aid, embracing her with warm hugs, as if shielding her from the winds of uncertainty. "Everything will be okay, sweetie," her foster mother reassured in a soothing tone. "Remember, time will provide answers. Don't rush, you'll remember everything on your own when the time is right." Her last words seemed to be directed more towards Oliver. He, in turn, had no intention of forcing any actions, realizing the instant and complex moment they found themselves in. Toppled by a sudden turn, he headed towards the house, gesturing for the new inhabitants to follow him. The family had already lived in this mansion for a month, yet the girl's memory still showed no signs of recovery. Sometimes she seemed to recall fragmented pieces, but she herself couldn't discern what was reality and what was a figment of her imagination. Finally, after careful discussion, Oliver and Layla decided to seek help from professionals. As if by magic, the woman found a business card for a private clinic among her belongings, which had once been given to her by one of the doctors at the city hospital. Oliver had the means to pay for the specialist's services, and thus Mila began regularly visiting this clinic. Understand, don't expect instant results, cautioned one of the doctors. Memory recovery can take several months, even years, especially if memory loss occurred due to traumatic impact. Do you think she might have experienced trauma? Oliver asked anxiously. I mean, psychological trauma, clarified the doctor. We found no physical injuries, but the fact that she was lost could have triggered a memory blockage, especially if she believed she'd never return home. It could have worked as a sort of protective mechanism. Now we need to convince her brain that this mechanism is no longer necessary. Later that evening, when the children were tucked into bed and silence enveloped the house, Layla decided to knock on the door of the room where Oliver sat at his desk, engrossed in written notes in a thick notebook. Can I talk to you for a moment? She softly addressed him. I've been wanting to ask, but I haven't had the courage. What do you want to know? Oliver asked, meeting her gaze. Tell me about how Gianna disappeared, whispered Layla. If you want, you can call her by her usual name. She still doesn't respond to Gianna, and who knows if she ever will. As for the circumstances of her disappearance, I know almost nothing. We put her to bed in the evening, and the next morning she was gone. We searched the house and the surroundings, but found nothing. There were no signs of intrusion, as if she left on her own accord. But according to my information, she had no reason to act this way, noted Layla. No, she didn't, confirmed Oliver, nodding. 6 months of treatment at the clinic brought the first long-awaited results, especially joyful for the girl's father. Finally, Mila remembered him. Early in the morning, brimming with joy, she ran downstairs to the living room where Oliver was having breakfast and embraced him in happy hugs. This, of course, didn't diminish her attachment and love for her new family. However, now she genuinely rejoiced in the fact that they all lived together in the spacious house. Since then, she responded to both her names. When it was time to obtain her passport, she insisted that both names be included there. With each passing day, her memory gradually returned. The girl remembered episodes from her childhood, her mom, the neighbor kids she loved playing with. By the age of 14, she had remembered almost everything, except for one thing: what exactly happened on the day she disappeared and how she ended up across town. It took another 2 years before those memorable moments began returning to her. They came back slowly, smoothly, at first as blurred images, mainly appearing in dreams. But gradually, they gained clarity until they finally formed a single, cohesive picture. And it was then that Mila Gianna was able to tell her parents the whole truth. The revelation turned out to be even stranger, she said. I went after the kitten. What kitten? Layla exclaimed. The white one, so beautiful. Yes, that one. He was wandering in our yard, and I was curious where he vanished. I peeked out of the window. My room was on the ground floor, and I decided to follow him. I thought I wouldn't go far, just to see. I stepped out of the yard, and he was already gone. I ran in one direction, then another, trying to find him, but he never appeared. Maybe he went off to do his cat business. Or perhaps he was someone's pet and just went back home. Eventually, I realized I couldn't find him and decided to return home. So, you just got lost? Oliver exclaimed, surprised. Yes, that's right. And it seems that in trying to return, I was moving further and further away from home. By morning, I had reached the city, frozen, tired, and hungry. That's when I decided to catch a bus. After all, they run here and go. But honestly, maybe I boarded the wrong route. So, I wandered around the city for several days until I reached its other end. Perhaps no one even thought to look for me there. I hadn't slept all that time. I was scared. But at some point, my body couldn't take it anymore, and I fell asleep on a bench in the park. When I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. I wandered aimlessly, and at some point, my mother found me. That's the whole story, really, Mila concluded. Around the time Mila's memories returned, Oliver and Layla decided to get married, continuing to live in the same house. They grew very close and discovered numerous shared interests. Layla's own children. Layla fulfilled her long-standing dream. She returned to the institute to study economics and successfully graduated with honors. After that, her husband happily invited her to work in his company. They sold her old apartment and fully compensated Liam for his share in that property. So, they continued to live together as a large, close-knit family in a spacious mansion that had become their shared home. In memory of her adventures, Mila brought a huge white cat into the house. The stray animal needed an extended course of treatment. The parents grumbled for a long time about their daughter's reckless act, but they kept the cat. Soon, it became the favorite of all family members and claimed an honorary place in the house.